Some of you may remember me from the second SMUS Talks when I was a speaker back in January, but since then I've put down my quill and have retired to the organizational team. Tonight we will have 5 student speakers and a keynote speaker from our own SMUS faculty. Halfway through the evening there will be a 10-minute intermission where you should feel free to mingle, ask questions to the student speakers, listen to the student musical performance, and enjoy the refreshments in the back. Quickly, I would just like to note that none of this would be possible without the hard work of our founders, Candy Lee and Sarah Parameter. And now for some housekeeping items. Please be respectful during the presentations, so we ask that you mute your cell phones and electronic devices and refrain from talking to your neighbor during the speeches. Also, feel free to take videos and photos during the presentations, just no noise. Also, the event will be filmed and the footage will become available on smu.ca quite soon. Finally, please remember that the ideas expressed by the speakers are their own individual viewpoints and opinions, and they are not telling us how to live our life or how to think. Rather, are just sharing their experiences and ideas with us. I would like to introduce you to our MC for the evening, Matthias.
Hello everyone. As you said, my name is Matthias and I'll be your MC for the evening. I'm very excited and I'm sure you all are as well. Now to introduce our speakers. In the first half of our program tonight, we will have 3 lovely speakers for you. First up is Pritinder Dhillon, a grade 11 boarding student from Whitehorse, Yukon. Preet will speak about finding her identity through personal experiences. Please welcome to the stage Pritinder Dhillon.
Hi. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm Pritinder, or Preet, this is mine. Oh God, I'm sorry. Okay, so you may be perhaps wondering who/what this GIF or GIF may be from. I'll tell you. It is from one of my personal favorite movies, Zoolander. And in this scene, Derek Zoolander is questioning who he is. He doesn't know who he is. He's at doubt. So he looks into a pond and he sees his reflection. Who am I? He asks his reflection. I don't know, responds his reflection. And so Derek Zoolander proceeds to say, well, I guess I have a lot of things to ponder. And so Derek Zoolander is many of us too. We too are still pondering who we are. We too are still trying to figure it out. So I would like to share with you the story of pondering who I am, and then figuring it out. Okay. So, I grew up in a town with about 20,000 kids. It was the biggest and the only city in the Yukon Territory. Growing up with the kids I had gone to school with since kindergarten, it wasn't hard to notice I was a little different. I was slightly taller than the others, a bit more awkward, and I had darker skin. Because my town had a very, very small Indian population, it wasn't hard to see that I would never be like the rest. I was basically the only girl in my grade or in my school who looked like this. But don't think of it like that. I was never bullied or teased because of my appearance. My family had lived in this town for a couple generations now. And I was never treated differently because of this. I just knew I was never going to be like the rest, like anyone else around me. But I've come to the conclusion that all of this was in my head. I cared so much about what other people thought. As I got older, the internet was becoming more and more advanced. Soon, everybody could access it. Beauty standards and masculinity standards had evolved from a Barbie doll or an action figure or superhero comic into an Instagram sensation, a YouTube hit, or even people who thanked a plastic surgeon for their appearance instead of themselves. There are kids out there today trying to be like these picture-perfect people without even knowing if these people are real. The pressures of trying to love myself while still going through those awkward preteen years and trying to meet society's rigid standards got to me. It really got to me. I would become obsessed with the fact that maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe because I didn't have that many friends, or maybe because I did look different, or maybe because I was pretty quiet, but at the same time, I was kind of loud. I was trying to become perfect, but I didn't know how. I lost myself in the situation, in the background music of texting, cool music, gossip, new clothing, social media, and the fact that I would become an adult in a mere 4 years. Mentally, I still feel like I need more time. I got caught up in growing up without knowing how. I didn't know how to change and being true to myself. How do we adapt to a society that is so caught up in trying to stand out, but also fit in? When I first came to SMU, in the 9th grade, I had decided that I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't compare myself to these standards anymore. And I tried to live at my own standards first. But this is easier said than done. However, I tried to approach it with a different mindset. I thought that maybe I shouldn't care as much as what other people think, because in the end, not everybody cares. So in these past 16 years, although this may sound a little selfish, I have finally learned to live for myself. How did I do that? It was mainly the walks I chose to take for myself, the time I chose to take for myself, or the way I looked into a mirror every morning and I told myself that in my world, I should be the only judge. I shouldn't judge myself based on my cultural identity, my height, my attitude. You just gotta learn to either embrace these things, improve it, or do both. And these moments helped me find out that my identity only mattered to me. I decided to let the judgment of others pass me by. Who cared what they think? I remember listening to Bad Reputation by Joan Jett one day, 3 days in a row, on repeat. Because even if I had a bad reputation, I didn't give up. Who cared what they think? This may be a cliche, but I learned it is important just to be yourself and live for yourself, because in the end, if you're trying to impress your friends or anyone else, don't. If I want you to take away one thing from what I've shared with you, is that don't let anybody tell your glitter, or don't let anybody call your glitter dust. Because in the end, if you know your glitter is glitter, those who called it dust are wrong.
Thank you, Preet. Next up will be William Barry. Will is a passionate performer on the theater stage and a very involved member of the grade 11 community. Will comes from Rothesay, New Brunswick, and he will be talking about the role of gender and personal identity. Everyone give a warm welcome to Will Barry.
Hi everyone. When I was a little boy, I loved to dress up. And something that I loved to dress up as was a princess. The princess from Sleeping Beauty, Aurora, was my idol. Her golden tiara atop her golden head of hair was an ideal of grace and beauty. Dressing up and feeling like that made me happy. Slipping on her bright pink dress was like performing. I was an image of feminine beauty. I was 6 years old when I learned that it would not be appropriate for me to wear this costume for Halloween. A more suitable costume for a little boy would be a Power Ranger. So that's what I was, for 3 years in a row. The Blue Power Ranger. And I was perfectly happy in that, to transform into a warrior, a strong fighter of crime, in a perfectly masculine blue leotard. I knew that at home, I could adorn myself in frilly gowns and run about and not worry, because it was the performing that was fun. I was 11 years old when I learned to be ashamed of the princess dress. I was staying at my grandmother's house, and although my sisters encouraged me to keep playing in her old dresses, something had clicked. The people around me had taught me what was right and what was wrong. And it was wrong for a little boy to wear a princess dress. Part of how human beings structure society is by organizing things into categories. We created convenient words with which we label our different identities. And these labels are integral to society. It's how we function. But we should realize that these labels are not universal truths. Man, woman, what does a boy do? What does a girl do? Well, that changes over time. We fill in our social roles as needed and take on the characters we were raised to be. I was raised with Canadian values, so I call myself Canadian and act Canadian. In Canada of 1818, to be a woman meant to not be a political player, to stay at home and be a servant to a husband. To be a woman in 2018 means something completely different. We created these characters, and as we see a need to, we shed them. But make no mistake, we have not moved into a labelless society. We simply expanded our ways of thinking, adapted, created new ones, and tweaked old ones. That is the purpose of this talk. Not to define how identity should be, not to tell you which labels are fundamental truths, but rather to explore an alternative perspective on identity, specifically gender identity. According to the Canadian government, whereas sex refers to a set of biological attributes of humans and animals, gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, and expressions of individuals. Gender psychologist Judith Butler said, "The terms that make up one's own gender are, from the attar, outside oneself, beyond oneself in a sociality that has no single author. Just as we are not born feeling Canadian, or born as a servant to a husband, we're not born with a fully formed gender identity. Instead, we learn it from the culture we inhabit." Judith Butler would argue that gender itself is a kind of performance, the same way we fall into other social roles, a character we play. Perhaps putting on lipstick and high heels make you feel like a more put-together person, more powerful. Perhaps wearing a suit to work makes you work harder and feel like a professional. There's a fascinating history of trying on identities like their costumes that my little dress-up loving self was unaware of. New York City in the 1980s was a vibrant and exciting time. The city was full of life and artists, but also crime and poverty. It was the perfect environment for artists with nothing to get their ideas out into the world. The 80s was also part of a darker era, especially for the gay community. This was a time when gay people and transgender people were being discarded by society. During the AIDS crisis, which plagued the queer community, they were feared, hated by many, and simply not understood. Thus, many, especially young people, were disowned by their families, kicked out, and ended up homeless, flocking to places like New York City, where they would live with next to nothing. To live in that identity, the identity of the outcast or the hated, was painful. These people began to gather together as a community, supporting one another when they wouldn't be supported by society. They would come together in empty convention halls, event centers, and the piers of New York City. It was here that they could celebrate their identity and who they were. But more than that, they could experiment with, mock, and try on identities that they did not inhabit in a ball. A ball was an event where queer people from all over the city would come together and perform a sort of pageant, walking in categories, many of them defined by how well one could give realness, competing to see who could embody the category the best. A category could be, for example, to give military realness, and the winner of that category would be the person who best embodied a soldier, one who could embody the ideal of a strong, courageous, masculine person, seen as a hero by the people, the opposite of how many gay people were perceived by the public. There are more examples of this. Giving executive realness, the type of man that looks right past you in Times Square, rich, he has it all. It is fascinating that these people who were observing society so much from the outside, that they would pretend to be the very people accepted by it. Many people in the ball scene were transgender women. They would try to emulate the women they saw in magazines, supermodels like Cindy Crawford. You become one for just a night. Dress up, be celebrated, applauded. These people were trying on, mocking, and exploring identity, becoming characters before an audience, just as I did as a child, and just as we, in a smaller way, do every day as we stretch ourselves and change who we are as people. Gender identity is a contentious issue, but we can learn from the people in the ball scene that it is not static or immovable. It was fluid, dynamic, living only in the moment and how one felt. And we are learning. In Canada, for example, a gender-neutral X option is being added to passports. Some people think this is ridiculous. What people who are gender neutral is doing is experimenting with roles, figuring out where they fit and who they are. We don't have to trust this. You don't have to believe that non-binary gender identities are valid, but there's a basic level of respect to another human being, and if calling somebody he, she, or they makes their world make more sense and makes them more comfortable, it seems easy to provide them with that. In some ways, it seems like we will never be able to perceive what is really true. The picture we paint for ourselves of what is real is limited, in part built by the way we were raised. So we don't have to take that picture so seriously. We can play with it, stretch our limits, and ultimately, we should inhabit the identity that makes us happy. There's this famous scene in Sleeping Beauty where the fairies fight over which color Aurora's dress should be. They go back and forth, pink, blue, which is the best one? But I thought a couple weeks ago, why didn't they simply compromise as she danced off into her happy ending and make it purple? Thank you.
Our third and final speech before the intermission will be presented by Tessa Rehill, yet another grade 11 boarder from a multitude of different places, who will speak about the effects that her upbringing and life abroad have had on her personal identity. Please give Tessa a hand.
Hello. So, a kaleidoscope of people, places, events, and things that we sometimes take for granted, but are profoundly important to us, create our personal view on life, and make us who we are. Potato chips, movie theaters, smoke-free restaurants, sidewalks, bacon, fresh milk, and water out of the tap. All these things were not a part of my life until a year ago, yet now I appreciate them more than ever. Ooh. I used to live in Tunis, Tunisia, a small, progressive, Muslim-dominant country along the coast of North Africa, in between Libya and Algeria. It's hard for me to explain what Tunis was like because, for me, it was just living. Looking back, the funny things seemed so ordinary, like waking up at 6 a.m. to the mosque call to prayer blaring outside your window, or getting caught in traffic on a Friday afternoon because people are getting out of their cars to pray. Or having a vegetable truck honk its horn down the street like an ice cream truck in North America. We used to wash our vegetables because there was dirt on them instead of pesticides. I used to go to school and there'd be Roman ruins on the side of the road, no tourists in sight. And I used to take taxis to go the distance of the Victoria Airport, and they only cost $1 Canadian. Herds of goats were in the middle of the road, there were no seatbelts whatsoever, and there were sheep in the backseat of cars. And they had a notorious love for football, that is soccer. Now I miss these things instead. When I came back to Canada, I thought the adaptation required in every move would be so much easier. I wouldn't be a minority, I wouldn't be a girl afraid to walk down the streets in shorts, and I wouldn't be a girl afraid to express my opinion. I was incredibly wrong. The material things are easy to adapt to, but it's the mindset and values of a country that proved to be challenging. So even though I had my childhood rooted in Canada, I felt like I didn't belong all over again. I was living in between two worlds, two cultures. In Tunis, I made friends with people who had very different values than a typical North American. I went to school with people who didn't see the need to follow rules. I went to school with homophobes and families who thought it was more important to send their sons to school than their daughters. But they were good people, and I was their friend. But I learned to tolerate their values. I learned not to judge, and I learned to understand where they were coming from first. There's a poster on the second floor of the science building that reads, "No one sees the world like you do." This extends beyond our knowledge of stem cells and organic compounds, but to the subconscious cultural lens we gain every day. Every time we meet someone new, we have exchange stories and have a conversation, we go on living life seeing things slightly differently. Our personality is the accumulation of our cultural background, the values that we grow up learning, and the ones that we decide to adopt. Our lenses are as diverse as the faces on this planet. So yes, no one sees the world like you do. I bet you feel pretty special right now. Before, I was oblivious to the cultural lenses that I gained every day living abroad. Every country I visited, every person I met, every story I heard and experience I had. And to be able to understand the world around us, and more so to understand ourselves and the people around us, we have to acknowledge our cultural lenses. Every opinion that we think is wrong or don't agree with, there is a value attached to it that we either ignore or deem unworthy. A perfect example of this is a passionate Saudi boy that I met in Tunis. His mom and my mom were very close friends, and she once shared her voice on the subject of Saudi Arabian women being suppressed in Saudi Arabia. This is one voice among a crowd of voices, but it's still one to consider and to hear. She told us about how much she loved her king, how she saw that not being able to drive was a sign of respect, of status, and of value to that society. Who are we to impose our values and belief systems on another culture, on another society? Would we stop eating bacon because another person doesn't see it, that it's right? We should not be divided, but that doesn't mean we're not allowed to be different. So think of your life as a kaleidoscope. All the pieces and fragments that you accumulate, give yourself your own unique front seat to the exhilarating experience and ride of life. This is my story, my kaleidoscope of how I understand this strange world, how hundreds of colors can come together to create your own unique pattern, one that is lifelong and ever-changing. This is how I see the world. Thank you.
We will begin our second portion of the evening with a speech from Tony Liu, school prefect and day student in his senior year. Tony will discuss the connection between identity and mental health. Lend me a hand in welcoming Tony to the stage.
Wait, let me just start. Wait, how well can you hear me right now? Just here. Okay? Okay. It's a lot of notes. Wait, let me do this. Okay.
You can take the microphone off of the
It's fine, that'll be fine. Who am I? Who are you? And who are we? These are the questions at the foundation of our identity as an individual and as a species. And at the core of all of this is our brain. Today, I want to take a deeper look into the flawed way in which we think and process the world around us. So, my personal exploration into mental health and the way we think began on a night last spring break. On that night, I was feeling a bit lonely, so decided to bike down to University Heights to treat myself to a movie. The movie was okay. But it was then, right after it finished, that I was crushed by an overwhelming sense of loneliness and a numbing sadness. I remember biking around aimlessly until midnight, and then settling down at Tim Hortons to stare out the window for what seemed like an eternity. Why was I so sad and lonely? Could it be that I was less mentally healthy than I thought I was? Or even worse, did I need help? Well, like most people, I like to think of myself as being mentally healthy. Whether that's true is up for debate, but the point is, why is it that we're inclined to see ourselves as mentally healthy, even when it means ignoring problems that are obviously affecting our well-being? First, let's take a look at the term mental health. The word health implies that anyone with mental health problems are sick, vulnerable, and in need of help. And while this is an appropriate description in some cases, no one wants to see themselves in this way. As such, we often reject that there could be any problems with their mental health. Furthermore, in the news, we typically only hear about the extremes of mental health cases that often involve serious self-harm. This bias makes us associate mental health problems only with these extreme cases, which allows us to distance ourselves from our typically less severe problems. Everyone has flaws in the way we process the world. After all, we're all human. But we often only look to seek help to actually fix these problems when we've reached a point of crisis. And at that time, it's likely too late by then. This is completely absurd. It's like letting a kitchen fire envelop your entire home before calling 911. Except in this case, the house is your brain. In order to tackle these problems before they spiral out of control, we need to identify and challenge the flaws in our thinking. So, here's a question for you. What does the brain and the 45th President of the United States of America have in common? Any guesses? Any guesses? Houston.
They light up quickly.
Yes, no. The real answer is yes, the truth is out. No, the real answer is fake news. Our brain is very similar to the media as it takes in raw data from our senses and provides us with an interpretation of reality, just like how the media takes a world event and provides a news report. So many times, when it goes wrong, our brain can do something like this. Thanks, Candy. In these situations, it is important to separate your thoughts and emotions from the facts. For example, Chuck didn't call again. He always says this because he's trying to play games. In this situation, the situation is Chuck didn't call. The thought is he always does this because he's trying to play games, and you might be experiencing anger or frustration. Often just recognizing the difference between your thoughts and emotions and the facts can help separate reality from the fake news of your mind. Going deeper, there are certain patterns and biases that shape the way we cognitively respond to different situations. These are our core beliefs. Our core beliefs are often established earlier in our life through childhood experiences, parents, and cultural influences. Identifying these core beliefs can help one transform their general approach and perspective in life, as well as their identity. Here are two examples. Those who maintain a defect in this core believe that they have a general sense that they are inherently flawed, incompetent, and/or inferior. These thought patterns include, I'm not good enough, I'm stupid, I'm more useless than cable TV. A second example is entitlement. Those who maintain an entitlement core belief assume they are superior and deserve a lot of attention and praise. Some thought patterns include, I'm superior, I'm a very special person and deserve to be treated as such, and Kanye West. Other common core beliefs include helplessness, self-sacrifice, unlovable, among many others. Once we've identified and become more aware of our core beliefs and how they influence our thinking, we can take a look at how these core beliefs influence or manipulate our thoughts through cognitive fallacies. Similar to logical fallacies, cognitive fallacies are patterns of thought that may seem plausible at first, but actually do not make logical sense. Some common cognitive fallacies, as described in The Worry Cure by Robert L. Lilly, are catastrophizing, which is when you believe that what happened or will happen will be so terrible that you won't be able to stand it. Labeling is when you assign global negative traits to yourself and others, such as I'm horrible or he's disgusting. A negative filter is when you look only at the negatives of everything and you seldom look at the positives. Overgeneralizing is when you perceive a global pattern just from a single incident. Other common cognitive fallacies include mind reading, future telling, unfair comparisons, self-blame, and what-if thinking, and the other ones listed up. So, I want to ask you guys another question. How many of these cognitive fallacies have you committed today? How many? Over 5? Anyone? 4? Okay. Well, when I read through that list, I realized that I did every single one of them. So that was a shocker. There are many methods for overcoming these fallacies. One method to do this is to create a question. This approach involves asking questions that will force one to think deeply and critically about the validity of their thoughts and emotions. So let's go through an example. So the thought is going to be, I'm a failure. It's a pretty generic one, but is this thought realistic? Likely not. Nobody can fail at everything, and just because I failed at one thing or one area doesn't mean that I failed in every other area. Might this belief be a habit rather than something based on facts? If I've been thinking I'm a failure for a long time and consistently in response to every small and big problem, then this could easily be a habitual thought that I might tend to label myself as a failure even when not considering all the facts. Other questions you can ask yourself include, in what way might I only be focusing on one aspect of the event, possibly a negative side? Am I using or implying words that may be exaggerated or extreme? What possible misinterpretations might I be making? Notice how many of these questions connect to and challenge a specific fallacy. For example, am I focusing on one aspect of an event challenges the negative filter? Am I using or implying words that are exaggerated or extreme, challenges overgeneralizing and catastrophizing? Identifying and critically challenging your thoughts and core belief is the first step in tackling these problems. However, you shouldn't expect to be able to change your thinking immediately. Like any bad habit, especially one you've been reinforcing since the day you were born, changing the way you think, and in turn, taking control of your identity, is something that will take a ton of time and hard work. So, if it is so hard to fix these flaws, why don't we learn to establish good thinking habits early in life, possibly at school? We all know that it's much easier to establish a good habit than to fix a bad one. We learn in school how to question sources when doing research projects, but not to question the media that processes every second of our lives. What is stopping us from giving young children the tools to determine their own beliefs, rather than having their core identity shaped by forces beyond their control? I understand that doing so would require a ton of resources. But wouldn't you say that skill that impacts every second of someone's life is just as important and should be taught alongside subjects such as English, math, science, or history? So, to all the adults in the room, and students as well, global change can start anywhere. So why not here? Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Our final student speaker, our second last of the evening, will be Anna Considine. Anna is an avid rower and grade 11 day student who will speak about the struggle to find personal identity when there are barriers in the way. Please welcome Anna.
Okay, wait, hold on. Figure out how to use. Okay, there we go. Sorry. So this is me and my brother. Over the winter break in grade 9, me and my brother were naturally, as you do, having a competition over who had the strongest back. I remember both of us flexing as hard as we could, believing that we were the winner. And then my brother realized that something was very wrong. While yes, parts of my back were very muscular, there was a clear lack of symmetry. Somehow, none of us had noticed until then, but a few weeks later, I was diagnosed with scoliosis. And the story I'm going to tell you today began. To me, scoliosis was life deciding to mess with me. I didn't think it could be real. I didn't have pain, I was fine. It wasn't until I was faced in front of these glowing x-rays 2 months later that I finally realized that it was true. Endless medical jargon was pressing relentlessly in on me, and finally, it hit me. Immediately, I felt like all of the control I had over my life was taken from me. The doctors described my future as surgery, bracing, physio, and pain. And my desire for school, friends, and normal seemed irrelevant. In this first year, I was determined in my belief that you don't have to let things that are out of your control define you. I was determined to believe that you are in control of your life, that you can shape how you see yourself, that your identity is your choice. Endless doctor's appointments and missed school in the following months all threatened my carefully controlled identity. I felt my back trying to take control, and I resisted fiercely. Even when I first strapped on my brace, my first thought was, how can I hide this best? How can I manage this so no one notices, so that I don't notice? It seems ironic, considering how far out of control my life was, that suddenly control was everything. Almost as if the more that life takes control from you, the more that you grasp desperately to feel like you were in charge. And then, in November of grade 10, I was given the perfect way to take back control: surgery. While yes, terrifying, my goal was always to not let scoliosis change my identity. And through this, there was the possibility of an end to all the treatments and bracing and pain that I was faced with. There was the possibility of getting control back. And I felt hope. Hope because I'd found a way to get past this thing that had been forced on me. Life had tried its hardest to change the course my life was going to take, but I was in control. My identity was my choice. Surgery was the solution. And here you can see it was a success. And if things had stayed this way, I would have told you today what I planned to tell you when I first signed up to do this speech. That you can shape your identity. That you don't have to accept the future that life tries to give you. And then, a few months ago, something changed. My back took a turn for the worse. And I missed a lot of school. Again. Which pushed this speech's completion date later and later. And I found myself incredibly stressed. Suddenly, my back was looming over everything, and I couldn't control it. My identity was ripped from my hands, and I couldn't control it. Quickly, I thought that I'd clearly done something wrong. There must be something I could do so that I could take back control. I went back to physio, I got acupuncture, I got massages, I got new medication, and nothing was working. I didn't have control. I felt panicked, betrayed, because I had done everything right. And here I was, completely lost once again. Well, I'm fairly sure that I stressed out everyone planning this event in the process. The late completion of this presentation gave me the time to think, and I ended up changing my perspective on my back completely. I had always thought that the emotional stress my back was causing was from its repeated attempts to force my life to revolve around it. But then I realized that it was in fact because I was trying so hard to control it. I was exhausting myself from trying my hardest not to accept that pain, numbness, headaches, and frequent doctor's visits are all a part of my life. I saw allowing these things into my life as giving in, as weak. But I forgot to realize what should have been the most obvious thing, that you can't control everything. As much as you want to, you can't control everything. Now, this new revelation terrifies me, and I am struggling even right now as I stand here in pain to accept that it's not because I'm not doing enough to control this, but rather that there are simply some things in your life that you don't get to choose. There are things that you will encounter that you wish weren't there. And while you may, as I have for so long, Try not to let them be a part of you. It is important to realize that your identity is a reflection of every event in your life, good and bad. And while we all want to be in control, we cannot control the things we are faced with in our life. All we can do is take steps towards managing the bad, and then accept that whatever happens after that is beyond our control. While I relentlessly resisted my back's attempts to turn my identity into my scoliosis, or to allow my scoliosis to detract from any of the aspects of who I was making myself miserable. All we can do, all we should do, is let everything, the good and the bad, mold us into a stronger person. We don't choose what happens to us. All we can choose is how it becomes part of us. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Anna. That was amazing. Now, to finish the evening, we will have SMUS staff member, Mrs. Dawn Wilson. Ms. Wilson's role at St. Michael's, where she's worked since 2005, is Director of Education Extension and International Programs, where she manages local programs and creates international exchange opportunities for SMUS students. She has a bachelor's degree in arts from the University of British Columbia and an MBA from the University of Victoria, and has worked around the world. Ms. Wilson will discuss the idea of identity through the lens of culture. Please welcome our final speaker of the night, SMU's own Mrs. Worldwide, Ms. Wilson.
Wow, what a great introduction. I have to make sure I hold this right.
That's the one that doesn't have the arrow.
So when Nathan and Homer first asked me last week if I would speak at this, I said, okay, how much time do I have? And they said, oh, about 8 minutes. So then I was thinking, well, I'd really like to talk about culture, because that's a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. And then I realized that there are actually 8 letters in the word identity. So I decided to think, well, 1 minute per letter, that'll keep me on time, and you'll know when I'm getting to the end, and I'll know as well. So we'll all know when we're coming to the end. So just a little bit of background. So that's identity in 8 minutes, hopefully. But I hope nobody has a timer. Just a bit of background about me. When I finished high school, I could not wait to leave Victoria. So I first went to Quebec City and studied at the Université Laval. And then I came back and finished a degree at UBC. And then after UBC, I went to Paris and studied at the Sorbonne for a year. And then I came back from Paris and did a teaching degree at the University of Victoria. And I just had to leave Victoria again, so I went to Japan, which was initially supposed to be for 2 years, but I ended up staying for 6. And that early part of my life all of that experience was incredibly formative for me and really impactful. And it just created this very strong interest in culture. So in my job, I get to travel a lot. I do intercultural training. I do intercultural competency assessment. So it's really a topic that I'm fascinated with, so I wanted to talk about that this evening. Just a couple of notes. The words that I've taken from the letters of identity are based on some teachings of some really brilliant researchers, Franz Trompenaars, Gerrit Hofstede, and Edward T. Hall. So they had 6 or 7 different dimensions of culture that they identified through largely as a result of research that they did on multinational corporations and managing those corporations. And Edward T. Hall was looking at how we communicate interculturally. So that's what I used for those letters. One other thing is that culture, it's a very broad topic, but it's a very dynamic and fluid concept. So there are always exceptions to every generalization we make. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that there are all these tendencies that are unique in every individual, as I think several of our speakers already mentioned. So let's start with I. So in the English language, that's the only language that I know where the I is capitalized. If you think of some other languages, French, Spanish, Japanese, Mandarin, Russian, Danish, German, all of those I's are small letters. And in fact, in English, all of the other pronouns are lowercase. So we are from a culture that's very me-centric. So I found that really fascinating. D is for direct communication style. This is something that was really difficult for me to deal with when I lived in Japan. Westerners have a very direct communication style. Also, I forgot to mention that these images are from a book by Yang Liu. She's a graphic designer from China, and she spent several years in Germany. So she had this very unique perspective of East and West, and she has these stunning images that she created. So I've borrowed some of her images for the purpose of these, to illustrate these ideas. So Westerners have a very direct communication style. We say what we want to say, and we don't worry about any feelings or any sort of repercussions, whereas Asians tend to have a more indirect, circuitous style. And I really struggled with when people would answer questions that I had, and I'd sort of go, well, okay, what did you mean by that? I don't do mind reading, so contrast that with a story in the news in March about a waiter who was here on a work experience program from France, and he was fired from Milestones because he was considered to be too aggressive. And he said, well, no, this is a cultural problem. I'm being very French and professional and direct, and it's a cultural difference. So he felt that he had been unjustly fired. I is for eye contact. So in our Western culture, we feel it's really important to maintain eye contact, and that's a sign that you have the person's attention. And if you look away, it's almost like you're hiding something, or that you're maybe untrustworthy. Whereas other cultures consider that to be aggressive and hostile. And so it's a very important aspect of communication style, is considering what you're doing with your eyes, where you're looking, and if they're averted or if they're looking directly at the person. N is for negotiating across cultures. So this is something that I find fascinating, because when you think of negotiation, you often think of conflict. And our idea of conflict is usually fear, high emotions, fight or flight. So it's something very negative that we tend to avoid. The character there is, I've been told, Chong Tu, which in Mandarin means danger. Those two characters are danger plus opportunity. And that's another way of saying a challenge. So it's a very different way of looking at conflict, something that's welcomed, almost. So it's so important to consider the cultural context of who you're negotiating with when you have intercultural negotiations. And I think a case in point would be the two Koreas who've just had a rapprochement, because they come from very similar cultural contexts, and I would argue much more similar than an American context. And it's amazing the progress they've made in their negotiations. T is for time. So Hofstede had two ideas of time that he divided into monochronic and polychronic. Monochronic time is where you value time. Time is money. We don't want to waste it. we spend time, we save time. And it's so important to be punctual and on time. The polychronic attitude towards time is much more fluid. So it considers the past, the present, and the future as interwoven. So it's a very different attitude. And Japan sort of has an interesting blend of the two, because I don't know if there are any other countries where the trains are on time, meetings start on time. It's so important that you don't lose any time. But at the same time, if you work in a company, you don't actually have an end time. You can go home after the boss leaves and not before that. So it's not a question of what time work is over. It's a question of, well, we respect the boss goes home, okay, now we can go home. And after you leave work, you go out for a drink with your colleagues, and who cares what time you get home? Because it's all about the relationships that you build with your colleagues. And time is very fluid, and it's really irrelevant in situations like that. So here's another chart that just sort of summarizes those different attitudes. I is for individualist. This was something else that I really had a lot to learn when I went to Japan. Individualist, where the person is important, where our autonomy and our freedom and our independence is so important versus the interest of the group, the community. When I first arrived in Japan, right out of the airport, I noticed that people were wearing masks. And everywhere I went, there were just people wearing masks. And this was in the mid-'80s. Is the pollution that bad that everyone has to wear masks? They can't breathe? But then I realized that they are wearing the masks because they're protecting each other from their germs. So it's out of concern for everyone else that they're wearing the mask, and it's not about their selfishness and that individualness, but the very broad sense of community and valuing community. And after the earthquake hit and the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown in Fukushima, other Japanese people have told me that it is because of that sense of community and caring for one another that the country came together and rose above that huge crisis because of that sense of community. T is for turn-taking. And this is a really important concept for a language teacher. And something that we're not always aware of, but some cultures tend to talk over top of one another. So very excitable, and they just talk, and there's lots of noise going on, whereas other cultures take pauses in between. So there are very different communication styles between cultures. And I recognize in Japan in particular that silence is is highly valued. So where in Western culture we're constantly trying to fill the silence and speak and say, let's keep going, I don't want there to be any silence. In Japanese culture, silence is valued, and it doesn't matter, you don't have to always have noise or talking. And finally, Y is for you. And it's for you to take away what you've heard tonight from our very eloquent and articulate student speakers and reflect upon what identity means to you. Thank you.
So, Ms. Wilson, thank you very much. Those are very inspiring words. On behalf of the SMU organizational team, we would just like to offer a huge thank you for being our keynote speaker tonight, and here's just a little something as a token of our appreciation.
All right, another round of applause for all the speakers tonight, please. It's been a pleasure emceeing for all of you tonight. I'd like to give a quick shout out to our founders and everyone, or especially the people who helped organize the event and the very first events, Sarah Perlmutter, Candy Lee, and Samina Makin-Badajieva. So a hand for Thank you. So a little hand for everyone. And now I'll pass the mic on to Nathan, who will close the event. To Candy, who will close the event. Sorry. Candy will now talk.
Hi guys, just to clarify, I'm not closing the event. I'm Candy, I'm one of the initiators of Smallpox. For those of you who have been here for the entirety of the Smallpox journey, this will be your third and last time seeing me here on the podium as I'm graduating this year. Today I'd just like to share with you very briefly my journey with Smallpox. 3 years ago in grade 10, I remember sending an email to Mr. Geddes about potentially hosting a textile event at our school. An email to which he quickly responded, and I quote, "Hi Candy, I love this idea. Have you explored it any further?" I got scared. As any marginally responsible teenager, it took me solid 2 months before I gathered up the courage and respond and to meet with him. And then it took off from there. As I witnessed the growth of the event, I have also experienced a similar journey of my own. I needed to give my first assembly announcement because of Smallpox, which was terrifying. I got introduced to a bunch of amazing people who never failed to challenge me to work harder and to do better. I learned a lot about how to work with a team. Unfortunately, I also had to learn the overwhelming amount of fine details that could potentially go wrong in the planning of an event. However, my biggest takeaway from the journey over the past 2 years is a profound sense of possibility. With an idea and a group of dedicated individuals who believe in a cause, anything can happen. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Candy. I'm actually closing it this time.
Sorry.
It's fine. I'm Nathan. I was one of the lead organizers for this event, this SMUS Talks, and I think I want to close by starting out by saying a huge thank you to all of our student speakers and our guest speaker for their amazing stories and insight, and we would never have had this event happen without you. Let's give a hand. Secondly, I would like to thank our teacher sponsor, Mr. Geddes, for putting up with all the toils that went on with making this event happen. The date moved so many times, we had multiple speakers change in and out. So I want to give another hand to Mr. Geddes for helping. Finally, I would like to thank the SMUS Talk organizational team. It's been a really great pleasure to work with everyone, every single one of you. Especially with the time crunch that we have with AP season at this point in time. And also to the founders of SMUS Talks, for them, they're graduating this year, so it's their last time. So we really want to embrace the idea and keep the event going as strong as it has been. And so also trusting us grade 11s to take it on. And on behalf of the organizational team, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Without you, this event would not have been possible, and I hope you enjoyed the event as much as I did. These stories were really amazing, and I hope you learned something or took away something that could be shared in the future. You're welcome to stick around and talk to the speakers, and we seem to have a lot of food over there, so if you really want some more food, that'd be great if you guys could finish it. Thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you next year. Thank you.
Good job.